"I can restore the power grid in 2 hours," said the retired lineman. The utility director laughed in disbelief. "A pensioner fix the blackout?" When a retired lineman faces the darkened city and says he can restore power in 2 hours, the Emergency Operations Center's silence reveals that nobody imagines what comes next. Stephen Caldwell, the Power Grid Authority Director everyone called Director Steele, stood in the emergency command bunker, slamming his fist on the situation table so hard the coffee mugs jumped. "What do you mean the repair crews won't arrive until tomorrow morning? We have a complete grid collapse. 18,000 homes without power, hospitals running on backup generators. This blackout is costing us $400,000 per hour, and it's election week." The massive display screens showed the devastation. The entire northern district dark, caused by a catastrophic failure at Substation 7 when lightning struck during the storm. The transformer array had exploded, cascading failures knocked out backup systems, and now the entire sector was down. The most optimistic estimate said 12 hours to diagnose the problem, another day to source replacement transformers, 36 hours minimum before power restoration. In this chaos of flashing screens and frantic phone calls, Thomas Rivera pushed through the security checkpoint, retired employee badge clipped to his worn jacket, tool belt hanging from his shoulder. Thomas was 68, but looked 80 from decades of climbing power poles in all weather, breathing transformer oil fumes and working with deadly voltage. His flannel shirt was faded, his jeans patched at the knees, and his weathered hands showed the scars of 43 years as a master lineman. But his eyes had a different gleam when they landed on the grid failure diagram on the main screen, the gleam of someone recognizing a problem he'd solved 100 times before. He approached the cluster of engineers and managers arguing around the situation table. "Excuse me, Director Caldwell," Thomas said, removing his power grid veteran's cap in old courtesy. "I can restore that grid. 2 hours. The transformers aren't destroyed. They're locked in thermal shutdown mode. I can manually reset them using the emergency bypass protocol from the 1977 manual. No replacements needed." The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds but felt like eternity. Then Director Steele turned, saw the old retired lineman in worn work clothes with an ancient tool belt, and let out a laugh so dismissive it made the junior technicians stop their frantic diagnostics to watch. "Get out of here, Rivera. You've been retired for 5 years. This is modern grid management with computerized systems, not the Stone Age methods you used. Security, escort this pensioner out before he hurts himself." The security officers approached, hands gesturing toward the exit. Staff members gathering for the crisis briefing paused to watch the spectacle. Thomas didn't move, didn't lower his eyes, just held his cap with both hands and kept looking at the grid diagram as if it were speaking to him in a language only they understood. That's when the woman approached. She'd been there since the crisis began, watching from the back observation deck with a laptop and an unreadable expression. She wore a simple black pantsuit, conservative shoes, no jewelry or obvious credentials. She looked like just another government liaison or insurance auditor. But there was something about how she carried herself, a quiet authority that needed no introduction. "Let the man speak, Stephen," she said, with a calm but firm voice that cut through the dismissive laughter. Director Steele turned, irritated. "And you are?" "Linda Park, Federal Energy Regulatory Observer. I'm here documenting your emergency response for the Congressional Oversight Committee," she said smoothly, showing federal credentials. "I strongly suggest you hear what this former employee has to say." Thomas turned to her, grateful for the basic respect. "This grid doesn't need new transformers, ma'am. It needs someone who remembers the old fail-safe systems. When transformers overload from lightning strikes, they don't burn out. They lock themselves in thermal protection mode to prevent explosion. There's a manual reset sequence that requires physical access to each unit and a specific bypass procedure. It's not in the digital manuals because it was deemed obsolete 15 years ago when everything went computerized. But the hardware is still there. I installed half those transformers myself in 1985. I can reset them and restore power in 2 hours. The silence returned, but different now. It was the silence of institutional disbelief. Director Steele took 2 steps forward, face red with condescension. 2 hours? Your pension checks must be going to your head, old man. Our computer diagnostics say complete transformer replacement required. You probably can't even operate modern safety equipment. Leave before I call the police for trespassing. But Thomas didn't look at Director Steele. He looked only at Linda, straight in her eyes, with serenity that disarmed skepticism. I only need basic access, security clearance to enter Substation 7, my old toolkit, and someone to throw the master switches when I give the signal. I owe nobody anything. I just want to help. This city deserves its power back. Those last words hung in the tense command center air. Linda Park, who wasn't actually a federal observer but Catherine Morrison, the state governor's chief of staff conducting an anonymous competency audit of critical infrastructure leadership, felt something stir in her chest. Not pity, recognition. She saw in that old lineman something absent in all the computer-trained engineers, all the contractors on speed dial, all the emergency protocols on screens. Pure expertise born from experience. Give him access, Linda said, and her voice admitted no negotiation. Director Steele opened his mouth to protest, but the look he received from this supposed federal observer made him reconsider. But if he causes further grid damage, you're personally and legally liable, Steele grumbled, turning to complain to his legal team. Thomas grabbed his tool belt and headed for the security vehicle that would take him to Substation 7. Linda followed, carrying a safety vest and hard hat. They drove through the darkened streets in silence, passing homes lit only by candles, traffic lights dead, businesses shuttered. When they arrived at the substation, the scale of the disaster was visible, scorch marks on the transformer housings, emergency lockouts engaged, warning lights flashing red across all systems. The entire facility was in protective shutdown. Thomas approached the main transformer array without hesitation, running his scarred hands over the housing like greeting old friends. Linda stayed by the fence, watching. How did you learn this reset procedure, Thomas? Thomas paused, looking back at her in the emergency lighting. I learned it in 1977, ma'am, during the Great Blackout. My mentor, old Carl Morrison. Linda's breath caught. Her grandfather. He showed me that computers fail, software crashes, but mechanical systems with manual overrides last forever. He said someday we'd rely too much on automation and forget the basics. He died in 1998, but I never forgot what he taught me. Kept my old manuals, my old tools, my old knowledge. Linda felt tears threatening. Her grandfather, Carl Morrison, the legendary master lineman who'd literally built this power grid with his own hands. And here was someone who'd learned from him, who'd honored his wisdom for decades. And why are you doing this for free, Thomas? You could demand consultant fees, overtime rates. Thomas stopped, turned to face her fully, his weathered face serious in the flashing warning lights. Ma'am, when you can help, you help. This grid gave me a good life, supported my family, put my kids through college. If I don't use what I know to serve back, what kind of man am I? Money fades, retirement gets boring, but helping people in crisis, that matters. That's what Carl taught me. Linda felt an unexpected lump in her throat. She stood before something rare in modern America, selfless expertise without expectation of reward. In that instant, she made a decision that would change 2 lives and possibly an entire city's infrastructure future. The evening darkness deepened. Thomas was working, opening access panels with his worn tools, when the sound of expensive diesel engines roared up to the substation. 3 massive utility trucks pulled in, emergency lights flashing, followed by a luxury SUV. Out stepped a man in his 40s, immaculate safety gear, carrying a tablet, and surrounded by a crew of young technicians in matching uniforms. "Director Caldwell," he shouted, jogging over. "It's me, Brad Hutchison from Grid Tech Emergency Solutions. Heard about your catastrophic failure and mobilized our rapid response team from 3 states away." Director Steele practically ran from the command vehicle, like salvation had arrived in expensive packaging. Brad adjusted his brand-new hard hat and smiled with the confidence of someone who'd never failed because they only took lucrative emergency contracts with government agencies. "We specialize in critical infrastructure recovery, brought our proprietary AI diagnostic system and modular transformer replacement units. We can have the entire grid rebuilt and online in 30 hours for our standard emergency rate of $1.2 million. He finally noticed Thomas, who'd paused his work inside the transformer housing, looking out at the commotion. And who's the old guy?" Director Steele let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, that's just a retired employee claiming he can fix it in 2 hours with some ancient manual reset nobody uses anymore. Delusion. But this federal observer insisted we let him try." Brad looked at Thomas with a mixture of pity and professional superiority that came naturally to expensive consultants. "Sir, I respect your years of service, but modern grid recovery requires certified specialists, computerized diagnostics, and NARC compliance protocols. This isn't the 1970s anymore. You could get seriously hurt or cause a cascading failure affecting the entire region." He gave a dismissive wave and was about to deploy his crew when Linda stepped forward and blocked access to the substation gate. "Brad Hutchison, is it?" Linda asked, voice calm but with unmistakable steel underneath. "Yes, ma'am. Owner of Grid Tech Emergency Solutions, certified by IEEE, contracts with 17 utilities across 9 states, featured in Energy Magazine twice." "I'm the Federal Regulatory Observer," Linda replied, "and I think it would be prudent to observe the outcome of the current repair attempt before deploying $1.2 million in ratepayer funds." Brad blinked, genuinely confused. "With all due respect, ma'am, this retired employee doesn't even have modern equipment. Look at him, using hand tools from the Carter administration and working without computer diagnostics. This is critical infrastructure in a major metropolitan area, not a hobby restoration project." Before anyone could respond, Brad was already deploying his impressive array of technology, setting up his AI diagnostic station, running fiber optic sensors into the transformer housings, consulting real-time data on multiple screens. His crew worked with Silicon Valley efficiency, and news helicopters that had arrived to cover the blackout filmed the impressive display of modern crisis response. Thomas just took a deep breath, climbed deeper into the transformer housing, and kept working on the manual bypass mechanisms that predated computers. No anger on his weathered face when he emerged briefly for water, just ancient sadness from seeing the same pattern repeat across his lifetime. Money, confusing expensive solutions with effective ones, new technology dismissing proven methods. Linda stayed by the substation entrance, holding Thomas's water bottle and backup flashlight. "Aren't you going to defend your approach?" Thomas shook his head, wiping transformer oil from his hands. "Don't need to, ma'am. The grid will speak for me. Always has. Always will." For 90 minutes, Brad worked with maximum corporate efficiency. His team ran AI diagnostics, generated comprehensive failure reports, took thermal imaging of every component. News cameras captured every technological flourish. Director Steele stood beside Brad like a proud sponsor, nodding whenever Brad said something that sounded cutting-edge and expensive. "See here, Director. Our AI analysis confirms catastrophic transformer failure across all 3 primary units. core damage, winding degradation, insulation breakdown. Standard replacement is the only viable solution. We'll air freight new transformers from our facility, crane them into position, complete installation by Sunday morning. This is state-of-the-art emergency infrastructure response. He connected more sensors, generated more reports. Data scrolled across screens like stock market feeds. Diagnosis complete and validated, Brad announced to the cameras and command staff. Total replacement required. Timeline, 30 hours. Cost, $1.2 million. We can begin immediately upon contract execution and 50% deposit. Linda said nothing, just watched Thomas still working methodically in the transformer housing. 30 hours, Thomas murmured, emerging briefly. 30 hours while diabetics' insulin spoils in warm refrigerators, while elderly people freeze without heat. Linda felt something profound shift inside her. The old lineman understood community responsibility in a way the experts never would. You still think you can do it in 2 hours? Thomas nodded slowly, oil-stained but resolute. I'm certain, ma'am, but nobody here wants to believe the old pensioner. That's when it happened. Brad, wanting to demonstrate even more technological superiority, decided to run a secondary diagnostic. We'll deploy our electromagnetic field analyzer to create a comprehensive damage map for the insurance documentation. He activated the analyzer near the main transformer. But what happened next revealed everything. The analyzer's readings spiked, then crashed. Brad frowned, reset the device, tried again. Same failure. A third attempt produced error codes scrolling across the screen. His confident smile began cracking. This doesn't make sense, he said, loud enough for cameras to catch. Our equipment is detecting active electromagnetic fields. But that's impossible if the transformers are destroyed. Unless... He pulled up deeper readings and his face went pale. The transformers aren't destroyed at all. They're in protective lockdown mode. But our AI was trained on modern equipment. It misread the thermal signatures as catastrophic failure. These are 1985-era transformers with analog protection systems our software doesn't recognize. Director Steele's face went white. So we don't need replacement? Brad shook his head, looking genuinely shaken. No, we don't. But resetting these manually requires knowledge of obsolete procedures not in our database. GridTech cannot proceed. This is outside our operational parameters. I'm very sorry. He began packing his expensive equipment, crew following suit. Within minutes, the trucks were pulling away, leaving Director Steele standing in the floodlights, looking like a man watching his career crumble on live television. The news cameras captured every moment of the high-tech failure. Thomas emerged from the transformer housing, breathing hard but smiling. Ma'am, all 3 units are reset and ready. I just need someone in the command center to throw the master breakers in sequence when I give the word. The silence was absolute. Director Steele stared at Thomas like seeing him for the first time. Linda felt her pulse racing, and that's when she spoke, her voice carrying through the substation with undeniable authority that made even the news cameras turn. Thomas Rivera, you have complete operational authority. Command Center, this is Catherine Morrison, Chief of Staff to the Governor. You will follow Mr. Rivera's instructions precisely. Is that understood? Director Steele's jaw literally dropped. The truth of who Linda really was hit him like voltage. Thomas looked at Linda with gratitude beyond words, then keyed his radio. Command Center, this is Rivera at Substation 7. Stand by for breaker sequence. Throw Master 1 on my mark. Over the next 7 minutes, Thomas called out the precise sequence, a symphony of switches and breakers conducted by a master who'd done it 100 times. And then, like a city taking a breath after drowning, the lights came back on. The substation hummed to life. The grid indicators all turned green. One by one, across 18,000 homes, power returned. Refrigerators hummed, heaters warmed, televisions lit up, life resumed. The news cameras captured it all, the impossible restoration, the ancient procedures working flawlessly when modern technology had failed, the old lineman who'd saved the city. Thomas climbed down from the transformer housing, exhausted, covered in oil and grime, but smiling. Director Steele stood speechless. The cameras swarmed. And Linda, Catherine, finally revealed herself completely. She removed her observer credentials and pulled out her real identification. My name is Catherine Morrison, Chief of Staff to the Governor and granddaughter of Carl Morrison. I've been conducting infrastructure competency evaluations. Stephen Caldwell, you're removed from your position effective immediately for gross incompetence and systematic undervaluing of institutional knowledge. She turned to Thomas. Thomas Rivera, the Governor is creating a new position, Director of Legacy Systems and Critical Infrastructure Knowledge. Your job is teaching the next generation everything Carl Morrison taught you, and ensuring we never lose this expertise again. Salary, $130,000 annually plus full benefits reinstatement. Will you accept? Thomas looked at the official appointment letter she extended, at the restored grid humming perfectly around him, at the cameras broadcasting his vindication. He fell to his knees, crying. 6 months later, Thomas led Power Grid's new Legacy Knowledge Division, teaching young engineers the analog backups, the manual procedures, the human expertise that computers couldn't replace. And every morning he'd touch the old transformer housings, feeling the solid steel beneath the modern panels, and whisper, "Thank you, Carl. Thank you for teaching me that old wisdom still saves lives."